Check out how you can get those solar panels installed at your home or residence by going to onesolarsolution.com. Bringing you the world news coming up next. This is Radio Caravan, the world news read by Shabnam Modgil. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is calling for the police officers involved in the shootings of Jacob Blake and Breonna Taylor to face charges. 29-year-old Blake was shot by police and a police officer trying to arrest him in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Campaigning for more than a year as a calming, unifying figure, Joe Biden faces the most intense test yet of his core pitch when he travels to Kenosha, Wisconsin, a city wrenched by police and protest violence that makes it a microcosm of the nation's election year reckoning with systemic racism. Several demonstrators were arrested in Portland after they threw rocks and projectiles at police officials. The police said early this morning that the demonstrators began a march there around 11 o'clock, adding that officers closed the street and ordered protesters to not enter the area or risk facing arrest. A naked black man who told Rochester, New York police after his brother called 911 that he had COVID-19 was restrained with handcuffs and a spit hood, and his head was forced into the asphalt before he went limp. The 41-year-old man died 7 days later. He was visiting from Chicago and suffered from mental illness. A grainy video posted yesterday shows the fatal shooting of a black man by Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies after he was stopped on a bicycle for a traffic violation, but the video does not confirm the police allegation that he made a motion for a gun. A federal intelligence alert from the FBI field office in Chicago has warned that about 30 gangs in the city have made a pact to shoot police officers if they draw their weapons in public. President Trump has said major U.S. cities are seeing a spike in crime and has offered to send in federal law enforcement to tackle the situation. He signed a memo yesterday that threatens to cut federal funding to lawless cities, including Seattle, Portland, New York, and Washington. President Trump suggested that voters in the state of North Carolina should vote twice in the November election, once by vote and once by mail, to make sure their vote was counted. Voting more than once in an election is absolutely illegal. The House Oversight Committee subpoenaed Postmaster General Louis DeJoy for records about the widespread mail delivery delays that have pulled the Postal Service into the political spotlight as it prepares to handle an onslaught of ballots in the November election. Facebook has said it would stop accepting new political ads in the week before the U.S. presidential election in November, bowing to concern that its loose approach to free speech could once again be exploited to interfere with the vote. Nearly 100 Republican and independent leaders will endorse Democrat Joe Biden for president today, including one-time 2020 Republican presidential candidate Bill Weld and the former Republican governors of Michigan and New Jersey. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security defended its decision to withhold circulation of an intelligence report warning that Russia was trying to portray Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden as mentally unstable. The Democratic presidential nominee has plans to expand health care, rebuild infrastructure, help college students, address climate change, and build more affordable housing. But none of those things is his top economic priority. Instead, job number one for Biden on the economy is corralling into the coronavirus. The virus control is step one, and there is no step 2 or 3 without step 1, he said. The federal government has told states to prepare for a coronavirus vaccine to be ready to distribute by the 1st of November. The timeline raised concern among public health experts about an October surprise, a vaccine approval driven by political considerations ahead of a presidential election rather than science. And after days of political drama and finger-pointing over the expiration of the moratorium on evictions across the country, evictions have once again been put on hold. This time the order is coming from the Trump administration. And the United States said it will not pay some $80 million it currently owes to the Geneva-based World Health Organization and will instead redirect the money to help pay its United Nations bill in New York. Atlantic Hurricane Nana has made landfall on the coast of Belize and is expected to weaken as it moves overland, according to the U.S. National Hurricane Center in its latest advisory this morning. Police in Colombia have arrested 3 Venezuelans who were part of a failed plot organized by a former U.S. Green Beret to sneak across the border and oust President Nicolas Maduro. The Venezuelan government of President Maduro said it had invited the leaders of the United Nations and European Union to send observers to monitor parliamentary elections coming up in December. And the sight of a huge oil tanker that has taken on water and is leaning to one side of a remote stretch of the Venezuelan coast has triggered international calls for action. An American who fought with the Islamic State group for 5 years before being captured and sent home pleaded guilty yesterday to supporting a terror group. A Texas-born Omar Kuzu is 23 years old and spent 5 years handling communications for the jihadist group before his capture last year by the Syrian Democratic Forces. Syrian air defenses opened fire late last night on missiles launched by Israeli warplanes at a military airbase in the central province of Homs. And a U.S. reporter said the presence of thousands of Syrian mercenaries sent by Turkey to Libya to fight on the side of the UN-supported government was likely to degrade security and generate backlash from the Libyan public. The top UN official for Libya warning that the conflict-torn North African country is at a decisive turning point, with foreign backers of its rival government pouring in weapons in the misery of its people, compounded by the coronavirus pandemic that appears to be spiraling out of control. Tensions over the search for oil and gas off ethnically divided Cyprus would fade if Greek Cypriots agreed to divvy up the country's territorial waters and drilling rights with Turkish Cypriots, according to the man who hopes to be the next leader of the breakaway Turkish Cypriot state. And the confirmed death toll from the coronavirus has gone over 50,000 in the Middle East as the pandemic continues. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Radio Caravan. Belarus authoritarian leader reshuffled his top lieutenants this morning in an apparent attempt to strengthen his rule amid weeks of protests pushing for his resignation. And German Chancellor Angela Merkel faced mounting pressure today to toughen her ambivalent stance towards Russia following her announcement that Berlin has unequivocal proof that Russia's opposition leader Alexei Navalny was poisoned with a deadly nerve agent. The European Union executive has said today the bloc could only slap new sanctions after a probe reveals who was responsible for what Germany says was a deliberate poisoning with the toxic nerve agent of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. And a powerful typhoon ripped through South Korea's southern and eastern coasts with tree-snapping winds and flooding rains today, knocking out power to more than 270,000 homes and leaving at least one person dead. The Czech Senate president met Taiwanese leader Tsai Ing-wen during his visit to the self-ruled democratic island, defying China that has called the trip an act of international treachery and his statements a violation of Beijing's One China policy. China commemorated the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II in the Pacific, during which it endured a brutal invasion and occupation of much of its territory by Japan. Communist Party leader and head of state Xi Jinping led government officials in a minute of silence and presentation of floral wreaths at a memorial hall dedicated to soldiers and civilians who participated in that struggle. China now has the largest navy in the world and is aggressively looking to set up logistical bases in the Indo-Pacific region to enhance its strategic reach, while also working assiduously towards at least doubling the number of its nuclear warheads over the next decade. Beijing's main international airport today began receiving international flights from a limited number of countries considered at low risk of coronavirus infections. And the Indian Army has changed its posture from border management to securing the border on the 1,597-kilometer line of actual control in Ladakh after the People's Liberation Army's aggression in the Chushul sector, followed by additional induction of troops and support. The operation to the south bank of the Pangong Tso has brought into limelight the possible role of Establishment 22, a secret force also known as the Special Frontier Force under the administrative control of the Cabinet Secretariat and the Prime Minister's office. Army Chief General Naravane began a 2-day visit to Ladakh today to carry out a comprehensive review of the security situation in the region in view of China's fresh attempts to change the status quo along the southern bank of Pangong Lake. And Air Chief Marshal Bhadoria visited the air bases in the eastern sector and reviewed the level of operation preparedness and capability enhancement of the troops. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh is in Russia for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meet, and upon his arrival in Moscow, he opted for the traditional namaste to greet the top Russian officials. India's COVID-19 tally has raced past the 38 lakh mark today with the sharpest single-day spike of 83,883 fresh cases, while the number of recoveries surged, also pushing the recovery rate to over 77%. Delhi Health Minister said that the recent rise in Delhi's coronavirus cases is not part of a second wave of the virus, as the infection never left the national capital. Maharashtra police, which have been at the forefront in battling the coronavirus in the country's worst affected state as far as the viral outbreak is concerned, have reported 424 fresh cases in the past 24 hours. And nearly 200 Pakistani nationals returned home from India via the Wagah-Atari border post. They had been stuck in India after a lockdown was implemented to break the chain of transmission of COVID-19. The UN Security Council rejected Pakistan's efforts to get to Indian nationals designated as terrorists under the 1267 Sanctions Committee process after Islamabad failed to produce evidence to back up its allegations. And Prime Minister Imran Khan said that Saudi Arabia would always be a friend of Pakistan despite the government's recent criticism of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation over the Kashmir issue. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmoud Qureshi today denounced a French satirical weekly Charlie Hebdo's decision to republish largely controversial sketches of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. In light of the Supreme Court's orders, Prime Minister Imran Khan directed the relevant authorities to make arrangements for the early release of female prisoners, both under trial and convicted. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all that I have in the news for you today on this 3rd of September.